He was just a small-town mechanic with calloused hands, an old toolbox, and a garage that hadn't seen glory in years. She arrived in heels, driving history on 4 wheels, a car no one had dared to touch for decades. No promises were made. No one expected much, but when purpose meets patience, something begins to hum again. This isn't a story about engines. It's about second chances, and the kind of love that takes its time. If stories of quiet strength, human connection, and hope born from the simplest things speak to your heart, make sure you subscribe. There's always more to discover in stories like this. Now, let's begin. A poor mechanic fixed the engine. No one could touch. Then the woman who hired him took off her ring. The early morning sun filtered through the cracked windows of Grayson's garage, casting golden beams across the dust that hung in the air like memory. The place smelled of rust, oil, and faintly of tobacco, the scent Jack Grayson associated with his father's ghost. It had been over a decade since the old man passed, but the garage still felt like it breathed with his presence. His tools arranged just so, his faded army photo pinned above the workbench, his name burned into the heart of every bolt Jack tightened. Jack, now 41, stood hunched over the open hood of a '97 Dodge Dakota, sleeves rolled, fingers black with grease. The silence was his companion, broken only by the faint hum of an old radio and the metallic tap of a socket wrench. Outside, the Colorado mountains loomed in the distance, still streaked with the last snow of spring. Inside, time moved slower, and that was exactly how Jack liked it. He lived in a world of engines and carburetors, where problems made sense and could be fixed with enough patience. People were more complicated. So he let the town pass him by while he fixed the things others had given up on. Old tractors, beat-up pickups, a lawnmower or two. Most paid in cash, a few paid in homemade pies or elk jerky. Jack never asked for more. At precisely 9:15, the bell above the garage door jingled. Jack didn't look up at first. People didn't usually come dressed in heels and silk blouses when their mufflers fell off. "Excuse me," a woman's voice said, calm, measured, but carrying the subtle cadence of someone used to being obeyed. Jack turned, wiping his hands. On a rag, she stood in the doorway, framed by sunlight, early 30s, maybe mid-30s, tall, poised. Her dark navy coat was tailored, her expression unreadable, but it was her eyes that caught him off guard. They were pale green, clear, and watching him not like a customer, but like someone quietly appraising the inside of a cathedral. "I was told you might be able to help with something unusual," she said. Jack tilted his head. "Unusual how?" Without answering, she motioned toward the curb. Jack followed her outside. Parked in front of the garage was a car that seemed to belong in a museum. A 1962 Holloway Continental, pearl gray, as sleek like a yacht, with the kind of chrome detailing that hadn't been made since the Beatles topped the charts. But it was more than the make and model. The car radiated history, reverence. "I'll be damned," Jack murmured, walking a slow circle around it. "This is a Series 1 Holloway, only a handful ever built. My dad used to talk about this. Engine like it was the Holy Grail. It hasn't run in over 18 years, she said. No one has managed to restore it. Most won't even try." Jack crouched, eyes scanning the undercarriage, the telltale signs of rot, corrosion, missing parts. He exhaled low. "Looks like someone tried. Poorly. They gave up." Her voice softened as if revealing a bruise. "I haven't." Jack stood and met her gaze. There was something in her tone, defiance, pride, and underneath it sorrow. "You're the owner. I inherited it from my father." Jack nodded. "You'll need parts that don't exist anymore, wiring that predates modern schematics, and even if I can get her started, there's no guarantee she'll run clean." "I'm not looking for a guarantee," she replied, "just someone who won't quit before trying." There was a long pause between them, the wind teasing the hem of her coat, the smell of mountain pine drifting in. Jack wasn't a man who chased mysteries, but something about this woman and this car stirred something he hadn't felt in a long time. "You got a name?" he asked. "Claire," she said simply. "Claire Holloway." The name hit like a dropped wrench. Holloway, as in Holloway Motors, as in William Holloway, the pioneer of American design who built his own automotive empire and whose mysterious death in a plane crash had ended one of the most iconic family legacies in engineering history. Jack had grown up hearing his father tell stories about Holloway like they were bedtime tales, but the woman before him carried no trace of nostalgia, only silence. "I can't pay you what it's worth," she added, almost an afterthought. "Not in money," Jack raised a brow. "But if you do this, if you bring her back, you'll be part of something that matters. Something that shouldn't be forgotten." Jack looked at the car again. He imagined the engine sleeping beneath the dust, waiting for a steady hand and a bit of hope. He thought of his father, wide-eyed, describing the way Holloway engines purred like they had souls. He thought of how few things in life were ever really worth saving. "I'll take a look," he said finally. "No promises." Claire extended a hand. "That's all I'm asking." He shook it, firm, warm, and for a moment time seemed to pause. Two lives, wildly different, suddenly tethered by a piece of steel and history. As she turned to go, Jack caught her profile, sharp jawline, tight composure. But there was something else behind it, weariness, loneliness. She left without another word. Back inside, Jack popped open the hood. He stared down into the guts of the Holloway Continental. The engine was a marvel of outdated brilliance, complex, elegant, and maddening. It would take weeks, maybe months. He might fail, but Jack Grayson had never backed down from an honest machine. He looked toward the door where Claire had stood, then back to the engine. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Let's see what you're hiding," he whispered. The engine didn't reply, but the air in the garage shifted, just a little, as if something was waking up. The next morning, Jack stepped into the garage a little earlier than usual. He found himself drawn to the gleaming shape beneath the canvas cover, like it held secrets only he was meant to unlock. Outside, the mist hadn't lifted yet. The mountain air was cool, sharp. Inside the garage, the Holloway Continental stood, like a forgotten monument. Jack rolled up his sleeves. He'd cleared the front workbench the night before and pulled out a faded binder labeled Holloway Systems, Legacy Engines. It was his father's, filled with handwritten notes, sketches and repair tips from a time before the internet taught everyone how to fix everything in 10 minutes. Some of the diagrams were so old, the paper had yellowed and curled. He opened the hood again, letting the light from the overhead lamp spill onto the engine block. The engine was, indeed, a marvel, but it had suffered from years of neglect and at least 2 botched attempts at restoration. Several critical parts were either missing or jerry-rigged with modern substitutes that didn't fit. Whoever last worked on this engine had known just enough to be dangerous. He spent most of the morning cataloguing damage, photographing components, and cross-referencing notes. Around noon, the garage door creaked open. Claire stepped inside. This time wearing jeans and a tan jacket, her hair pulled back in a no-nonsense braid. No designer blouse, no heels. She looked more like someone stopping by a hardware store than a woman born into an empire. Jack didn't speak at first. Neither did she. She stood near the car, hands in her pockets, eyes following the movement of his hands like a silent observer. "You always this quiet?" he finally asked. Claire blinked, then gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "Depends on who I'm with." Jack raised an eyebrow but let it slide. "You want to know what I found?" She nodded. He led her to the side of the car and pointed with a screwdriver. "The starter's original, but corroded. The manifold's cracked. Someone tried to seal it with epoxy. The wiring harness is a nightmare, and there's a vacuum leak big enough to suck the air out of this town. Claire studied the car. Can it be fixed? Jack paused. Anything can be fixed if you care enough. The question is whether it's worth the time. She looked at him then. Really looked, not just at his grease-stained hands or his worn flannel shirt, but something deeper. He didn't speak like a man trying to impress anyone, just a man who told the truth. "I care," she said softly. Jack watched her a moment, then turned back to the car. "Then it's worth it." Claire exhaled. Not relief, not quite, but something close. She walked slowly around the vehicle, trailing her fingers along the curve of the rear fender. Her movements were reverent, almost hesitant. "My father used to sit me in the passenger seat when I was a kid," she murmured. "He said the engine had a heartbeat, that if you listened closely enough you could feel it." Jack glanced sideways. "Your dad was right." She gave a small, wistful smile. "He was always better with machines than people." "You're not the only one who grew up that way," Jack replied, surprising even himself with the admission. Claire's expression shifted. "Did he teach you everything?" "Pretty much. I was 12 when he let me rebuild my first carburetor. After that, I never stopped." A silence stretched between them, not awkward, but contemplative. Jack turned away, fiddling with a socket. "A wrench he didn't need to touch." "What happened to him?" Claire asked. Jack paused. "Passed about 10 years ago. Heart attack. Right here in this garage." Claire looked down, quiet. "I'm sorry." "Thanks." Jack cleared his throat. "What about yours?" "Plane crash," she said simply. "Business trip. I was in law school when it happened." "Law school." "I left. It wasn't for me." She didn't elaborate. Jack wanted to ask more, but something in her posture told him not to push. She was like an engine running cold. You had to warm her up slowly, or she'd stall. Instead, he said, "This car, it means a lot to you." Claire nodded. "It's the only thing he left me that wasn't paperwork or expectations." Jack let that settle. "I get a lot of people in here," he said. "Most don't care about the machine. They just want it to move. You care." Claire's voice dropped to a near whisper. "It's the last thing he touched before the crash. He'd just finished working on it, said it would be the start of something new." Jack looked at the engine, then at her. "Then we better make sure it runs." She smiled, not fully, not broadly, but enough that something softened between them. As the afternoon wore on, Claire didn't leave. She didn't talk much either, but she stayed, holding a flashlight when he needed, handing him tools without asking. She even swept the floor while he worked, saying nothing, just quietly making herself useful. When the sun began to dip behind the pines, Jack leaned back and wiped his brow. "I've got to hunt down a few parts that don't exist anymore," he said. "Might have to machine some myself." Claire nodded. "I'll cover whatever it costs." Jack gave her a long look. "This ain't going to be a weekend project." "I'm not in a hurry," she said. "Things that matter shouldn't be rushed." There it was again, that glimpse beneath her armor. A woman who knew what it was to wait for something real. As she gathered her bag to leave, she paused at the doorway. "You don't have to pretend with me," she said suddenly. Jack looked up. "Pretend what?" "That you're not curious who I am, or why I'm really here." He leaned against the workbench, arms folded. "You'll tell me when you're ready, or you won't. Either way, I'm not going anywhere." Claire stared at him for a second longer than necessary. Then she nodded once, quietly, and left, the bell above the door ringing like the last note of an unfinished song. Jack turned back to the Holloway. He ran a hand over the fender and smiled to himself. He didn't know why, but he was certain of one thing. She'd be back. Jack had been knee-deep in the guts of the Holloway Continental for nearly a week when Claire returned again, this time with coffee and 2 blueberry muffins in a brown paper bag. "You look like the kind of man who forgets to eat," she said, placing the bag on his workbench without ceremony. Jack, hands deep in the engine. "Bay," grunted. "I don't forget. I just don't stop long enough to do it." She handed him a coffee without another word. then pulled up the old metal stool near the door, the one his dad used to sit on when supervising a rebuild. She didn't talk much, and Jack didn't mind. There was something comfortable in the silence they shared. Claire watched him work, eyes scanning each motion, the way his fingers moved with confident precision. He wasn't just repairing, he was listening, interpreting, coaxing the machine back to life like a doctor learning a forgotten heartbeat. After several minutes, she broke the quiet. "You know more about this engine than most of the engineers I've met in my life." Jack took a sip of coffee and wiped his hands. "That's because I respect it. It's not just a puzzle, it's a legacy." Claire looked down at her lap. Her voice, when it came, was quieter. "Legacy is a funny thing. Sometimes it feels more like a chain." Jack glanced at her but didn't speak. He sensed she was offering more than just small talk now, that he was being tested. "My father built Holloway Motors from scratch," she said, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee lid. "Started in a one-room shed with borrowed money and 2 workers. Ended up employing over 30,000 people by the time I was 10. "I know," Jack said. "My dad used to read about him in car magazines like he was a folk hero." Claire gave a short, humorless laugh. "That's how the world saw him." She stood and walked slowly toward the Continental, her hand brushing the faded emblem on the grille. But what they didn't see was the pressure, the deals, the compromises. "My father was a genius, yes, but he was also tired." Long before the plane crash, Jack leaned on the bench, waiting. "He built this car right before it all started unraveling," she said. "The company was expanding too fast. Investors wanted faster returns. They started cutting corners on quality to save costs. My father hated it. He said if they ruined the integrity of the machine, they'd lose the soul of the company." Jack nodded slowly. He wasn't wrong. Claire's voice dropped. This car was supposed to be his rebellion, one last engine built entirely by hand his way. No shortcuts, no approvals, just him and the machine. He said it would be the last honest thing he made. Jack stared at the engine, the hollow silence settling over them like dust. "And then he died," she said. "And all of it, the car, the notes, the vision, just got shelved, like he never existed." Jack's voice was steady when he asked, "And what about you?" Claire looked up, surprised. "What do you believe in?" he continued. "The legacy or the man?" She swallowed hard. "I used to think they were the same. And now," she shook her head, "now I'm not sure there's anything left of either." The pain in her words wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, lived in. The kind of pain that didn't shout, only settled deep into the bones. Jack walked over and stood beside her, both of them facing the car. "There's something left," he said. "It's right here, under the hood. In every bolt he talked, every line he drew, he left something behind, and you're the one who didn't let it rot away in a warehouse." Claire turned to him. "I thought restoring it might bring me answers, or peace. Maybe both." Jack met her gaze. "It won't, not by itself, but it's a damn good place to start." They stood in silence again, but this time it was charged. Not awkward, not empty, but full of shared weight, neither of them needed to name. Claire took a deep breath. "I've got a meeting in Denver tomorrow. The board wants me to finalize a deal to sell the company." Jack stiffened slightly. "Sell Holloway?" "They've been pushing for years. Ever since Dad died, they've wanted to liquidate and merge with a European group. Clean profit, efficient, no more emotional baggage." "And what do you want?" Jack asked. Claire hesitated. "I don't know. I thought I did. But ever since I brought this car here, things feel different." Jack looked at her. "Maybe that's because you finally came back to where it all started." Claire blinked. "I don't mean the garage," he added. "I mean your father's idea of what this company used to be." She nodded slowly. I don't know if I can stop the deal. Legally, I only hold 35%. The rest belongs to people who care about profit margins, not spark plugs. Jack shrugged. Then let them make their money. But you've got something they'll never have. Claire tilted her head. What's that? A reason. She smiled then. A full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. It softened her, unmasked something Jack hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, yes, but also strength. She glanced at the car one more time, then stepped back. Keep going, she said. Don't slow down for me. Jack gave a small nod. I wasn't planning to. As Claire left the garage and the bell chimed behind her, Jack turned back to the engine. He opened the binder, flipped to the next page, and whispered to himself, "One last honest thing, huh?" Then he got back to work. The wind rattled the old garage doors as dusk settled in, turning the shadows long and blue. Jack stood over the Holloway Continental. Sleeves rolled to his elbows, a thin streak of grease marking his cheek like a war stripe. The car had sat dormant for nearly 2 decades, and it wasn't giving up its secrets easily. He had spent the last 3 days stripping down the outer components, fuel lines, coolant systems, intake manifold. What had once been a marvel of handcrafted engineering now looked like the remains of a forgotten relic. But to Jack, it was beautiful. The scars told stories. The precision, though worn, still whispered brilliance. He reached into the exposed cavity of the engine bay and tapped the distributor cap. It wobbled in a way it shouldn't. He muttered something under his breath and stepped back to jot notes on the clipboard. The binder lay open beside him, still filled with his father's looping scrawl. Note: Holloway ignition timing offset. By 0.06 for balance. Trust the feel. Don't overthink. Jack smiled faintly. That was his father in a sentence. Mechanics by feel, not formulas. It was the difference between being a mechanic and an artist. The garage bell jingled. Claire stepped in, her silhouette backlit by the orange dusk. She was in a sweater and jeans again, wind in her hair, holding a thermos and a sandwich wrapped in parchment paper. "You're late for dinner," she said. Jack looked up. "Didn't realize I was invited." "You are now," she said, setting the food down on the workbench. "Turkey and sharp cheddar. You look like someone who skips meals for vengeance." Jack chuckled and peeled off his gloves. "It's not vengeance. It's stubbornness. This engine is playing hard to get." Claire leaned over the engine bay. "You make it sound like it has a personality." "It does," Jack said, serious now. "This was the last one your father ever touched. He made it different, personal. Most engines run the way they're designed to. This one's got a rhythm you have to earn." Claire leaned her elbows on the edge of the car. "Like trust." "Exactly." They ate in comfortable silence. Jack took big, grateful bites while Claire perched nearby, sipping coffee from the thermos. "Tell me something," she said, finally breaking the quiet. "What makes you stay here, in this town, in this garage? You could have done more." Jack shrugged. "I tried once. Got a scholarship to a tech school down in Arizona. Made it 6 months before my mom's heart gave out." Claire's face softened. "I'm sorry." "Thanks." Came back to take care of her. "And when she passed, the garage was the only thing I had left, so I stayed." Doesn't sound like regret? It's not. I've fixed more than engines here, helped a kid rebuild his first dirt bike, taught a woman how to rotate her own tires after her husband ran off. This garage, he gestured around them, it's more than oil and tools. It's a place people come when they've got no one else. Claire looked around. The space was cluttered but lived in. Photographs taped to the cabinets. Old tin. Signs and license plates hanging like family heirlooms. "You've built something here," she said. Jack met her eyes. "So have you. You just don't know it yet." Claire looked down at the floor, then back at the car. "You think this thing'll ever run again?" Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I think it wants to, but it's going to fight. There's a hairline crack in the cylinder head, and the electrical's a mess. I'll need to machine some parts. And from scratch. You have the tools for that." "Not all, But I've got a friend in Pueblo with a lathe shop. He owes me 3 favors and half a clutch. Claire smiled. You don't do anything the easy way, do you? Jack grinned. Easy. Doesn't last. Honest work does. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The garage was quiet, except for the occasional creak of the rafters and the distant chirp of crickets waking up outside. Jack looked at her, noticing again how unguarded she became in this space, as if the noise of the outside world stayed behind when she walked through the door. You ever think about what you'd do if you didn't have to fight boardrooms and lawyers? He asked suddenly. Claire blinked. All the time. Well, she exhaled slowly. I'd want something simpler. Real. Maybe open a small bookshop near the coast. Something with creaky floors and a coffee bar. Nothing big, just mine. Jack smiled. You'd make a good bookseller, Claire laughed. You say that like it's a compliment. It is, he said, pausing. It's rare, people who want to build something honest. Claire looked down, then back at him. What would you do if you could walk away from here? Jack glanced around the garage. I don't think I'd walk away. I'd just build bigger. Teach kids who've never held a wrench that machines aren't scary, that you can make something powerful out of broken things. She studied him for a long moment. You really believe that, don't you? Jack nodded. I do. Claire was quiet for a while, then placed a hand gently on the car's hood. My father said this would be the start of something new. Something better. Jack placed his hand next to hers, both resting on cool metal. Maybe it still can be. Their eyes met across the engine bay. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was thick with understanding, with possibility, with something unnamed, but real. Claire pulled her hand back first. I should go. Long day tomorrow. Another board meeting? Another. Attempt at pretending I still want to sell everything, she said, half smiling. Jack watched her walk to the door. She paused, hand on the frame. Jack? Yeah? Don't give up on her, she said, nodding at the car. She was built. With love. Jack's voice was soft. I don't give up on anything built with love. She held his gaze for a beat, then stepped into the twilight and disappeared down the sidewalk. Jack turned back to the engine. He placed both palms on the fender and took a breath. All right, girl, he murmured. Let's see what you're hiding. And then he got back to work. The Holloway Continental rolled no more than 6 feet before the engine sputtered out again with a pitiful cough. Jack stepped out of the driver's seat, squinting against the sun, hands planted on his hips. The car had jerked forward like an eager horse, but just as quickly buckled under the strain of its age. Claire, standing nearby with her arms crossed, raised one brow as the vehicle hissed in protest. That was something, she offered diplomatically. Jack let out a dry chuckle. Progress, painful but still progress. He opened the hood and leaned in, already diagnosing. Claire walked up beside him, brushing her hair behind her ear as she peered. Inside, is that the sound of a stubborn carburetor or a mechanic overpromising to impress a client? Definitely the carburetor, Jack replied. I gave up trying to impress you around day 3. She laughed, and something about the sound seemed to lift the heaviness between them. Over the last 2 weeks, Jack had seen her more often than he'd seen anyone in years. Their conversations had shifted from awkward pleasantries to quiet trust, and from that trust came something even rarer: comfort. I was thinking, Claire said as Jack closed the hood with a firm push. What if we take her up to Pine Hill Ridge? It's quiet. Beautiful this time of year. She may not last long on the incline, but it'd be a worthy first test. Jack wiped his hands and raised a brow. You sure you want to try that with an engine that can't commit to a driveway? Claire gave him a challenging smile. That's what makes it an adventure. A few hours later, after replacing a stubborn valve spring and tightening the accelerator linkage, Jack packed a basic toolkit in the trunk. Claire brought a thermos of coffee and a wool blanket. They didn't say it out loud, but both knew this was more than a test drive. The sun was high by the time they turned onto the narrow mountain road leading up Pine Hill Ridge. The car rumbled, still rough but steady. Jack drove, one hand on the wheel, the other hovering near the shifter in case things went south. Claire sat in the passenger seat, window half down, the wind tugging loose strands of hair across her cheek. "You know," Jack said, eyes on the winding road ahead, "when I was a kid, I used to ride my bike up here and pretend I was running away." Claire smiled, watching the trees blur past. "And now? Now I think it's a place you come to remember what matters." She nodded, silent for a moment. Then, "I haven't been up here since I was 17. My father brought me the week before I left for college. We sat on the hood of the car and watched the sun set behind the peaks. He told me I could be anything, but he hoped I'd come home someday." Jack glanced sideways at her. "You think he'd be proud of what you've done?" She hesitated, then spoke softly. "I think he'd be proud I brought the car back." The road leveled out as they reached the ridge, opening to a sweeping view of the valley below, green, golden, dotted with wildflowers and grazing deer. Jack parked under a tall pine tree and cut the engine. For a moment, there was only stillness, the kind that settled deep into your bones. Claire stepped out and breathed in the mountain air like it held something she'd lost. Jack spread the blanket across the hood, and they sat together, legs dangling over the bumper, sharing coffee and silence. "This is the first time I've felt still in a long while," she said at last. Jack sipped his coffee. "You don't strike me as someone who lets herself be still. I didn't for years. I chased everything, degrees, deals, board approval, stock values. I think I was trying to earn his name, like if I worked hard enough, I'd stop feeling like an imposter." "You're not an imposter." Claire looked at him. "How do you—" "No," Jack shrugged, "because imposters don't fight to preserve the soul of something. They cash out. You didn't." She looked away, blinking fast. The mountains stretched out before them, vast and indifferent, as if to remind them how small their worries really were. "I keep wondering," she said, "if all this—" She gestured vaguely toward the car, the company, her life, "is worth saving, or if I'm just clinging to what's already gone." Jack thought for a moment, then answered quietly. "You ever hear an engine fire up after years of silence? It starts rough, loud, might even scare you. But give it time. The parts remember. They just need to feel like they belong again." Claire looked at him, eyes searching. "Sometimes," he continued, "we think things are broken when really they're just waiting for someone to believe in them again." She didn't reply right away, but her hand, resting on the blanket between them, slowly shifted closer to his, not touching, just near enough that he could feel the warmth. They stayed that way as the sun lowered in the sky, casting the whole ridge in a golden haze. When the light began to fade, Jack stood to start the car. The Holloway engine roared to life on the first try. Claire smiled. "She's ready." Jack looked at her. "So are you." They drove back in silence, the car humming steady beneath them, as if it too had found its reason to keep going. Morning light spilled into the garage like liquid gold, glinting off the polished curve of the Holloway Continental's hood. Jack stood at his workbench, head bent over a custom-machined distributor cap, his hands moving with quiet precision. The soft clinks of metal on metal echoed through the space, but his thoughts were elsewhere, still lingering on yesterday's ride to Pine Hill Ridge. There had been something in Claire's eyes when the engine turned over at the summit. Something quiet and unguarded. Not pride, not relief. Something deeper, like a part of her had been holding its breath for years and had finally exhaled. Jack didn't know what to call it, but it stayed with him. He tightened the final bolt, stood, and wiped his hands just as the garage bell jingled. He didn't have to look up. "You're early," he said. Claire stepped in holding 2 paper cups. "You say that like I ever left." Jack gave her a sideways smile. "Fair enough." She handed him the coffee. "Black, no sugar." He raised an eyebrow. "You're learning. I pay attention." Claire's gaze swept the garage, then returned to Jack. "You always this busy on a Sunday?" Jack took a sip. "Only when I've got an engine worth finishing." Claire walked toward the holloway and ran her hand gently across the hood. "She looks different." "She is different," Jack said. "Rebuilt the ignition with the custom distributor. Fuel mix is cleaner now. She's not just starting. She's singing." Claire smiled. "You're not going to tell me that's just mechanical precision, are you?" "Nope," Jack said. "That's love." They shared a quiet moment, both gazing at the car like it was a newborn learning to stand. Then Claire looked back at him. "I've been reading about you," she said. Jack blinked. "That's so." Town records, local news clippings, donations to the community center, a scholarship fund you set up in your father's name. Jack shifted. "Wasn't much. It was enough to pay for 3 kids' certifications in automotive tech," Claire said. "You didn't even put your name on it." Jack looked down, uncomfortable. "Didn't see the point." Claire stepped closer. "The point is, no one does that kind of thing anymore. Not without wanting something back." Jack leaned against the bench, arms crossed. "I had help once. A guy named Charlie helped my dad rebuild the garage after a storm took the roof off. Didn't ask for a dime. Just said, 'You help someone else when it's your turn.' I figured it's been my turn for a while now." Claire studied him, her voice softer. "You live by that?" "Try to." She smiled, faint but genuine. "I think my father would have liked you." Jack shrugged. "Maybe, but we probably would have argued about carburetor design." Claire chuckled, but then her expression turned serious. "The truth is, I envy you." Jack raised a brow. "Me? You know who you are, what you stand for. I've spent years being told what I should be, what the company needs, what success is supposed to look like. But in this place—" She looked around the garage. "Things are simpler, they make sense." Jack nodded slowly. "They do, but it doesn't mean they're easy." "No," she said, "but they're honest." A beat passed. Then Claire pulled something from her bag. A worn, folded envelope. "My father's handwriting," she said, holding it out. "I found this last week in an old journal. It's addressed to me, but I've been too afraid to open it." Jack didn't reach for it. "Why now?" "Because I think this garage is the first place I've felt like I could open it." He nodded once. Claire unfolded the letter slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. She read silently, lips parting as her eyes scanned the page. Jack watched her face, the subtle shifts, confusion, sorrow, then something like peace. Finally, she folded the letter and pressed it against her chest. "He wrote this a week before he died," she said, voice fragile. "Said he knew the board would try to erase his legacy. Said he hoped I'd find the courage to protect what mattered, not just what was profitable." Jack said nothing, giving her space. Claire looked at him. "He wanted me to find people who believed in craftsmanship, in passion, people who would never trade soul for speed." Jack met her gaze. "You already found them." She nodded, eyes glassy. "You're the first person who reminded me what that felt like." The garage settled into silence again, the soft kind that feels earned. Claire stepped forward, reaching into her pocket, and pulled out a check. Jack looked at it and immediately shook his head. "Claire, it's not for the work," she said. "It's to help you build what you talked about on Pine Hill Ridge. The garage, the teaching space, a place where kids can learn this trade the right way." Jack hesitated. "It's too much." "No," she said firmly. "It's just enough." He looked at her. This woman who had entered his life in silence and now stood before him offering not just money, but belief, Trust. I don't know what to say, Claire smiled. You already said it. You said you wouldn't give up on anything built with love. Jack took the check and tucked it carefully into the binder beside his father's notes. Then, as if nothing had changed, he picked up a socket wrench and returned to the car. You staying a while? He asked casually. Claire grabbed a stool and sat down beside him. You'd have to kick me out. And just like that, in a garage built from wood and memories, something invisible but profound shifted, not with thunder, but with the gentle, quiet certainty of two lives beginning to find their rhythm. The boardroom atop Holloway Tower was all glass and tension. Light poured in from three sides, casting sharp angles across the polished wood table, but it did nothing to warm the air. The men and women seated around the oval wore tailored suits and corporate smiles. Strategic, calculated, unyielding, Claire sat at the head of the table, notepad untouched, coffee cooling beside her. The blueprints for the merger were laid out in precise columns before her, detailing financial projections, consolidation plans, and cost-saving measures. On paper, it was perfect, streamlined, profitable. But every time she looked at the numbers, all she could see was the Holloway engine rumbling to life beneath the pine trees, the warmth of sunlit chrome. Jack's hands, calloused but careful, coaxing history back into motion. Her father's voice in her head, "Don't let them turn it into a logo, protect the soul." "Ms. Holloway," the lead counsel prompted, his voice clipped. "We'll need your signature on page 6 to initiate the transition. The shareholders are already preparing statements for the press." Claire didn't move. Across from her, Bryce Hamilton, CFO, sharp as a razor and twice as cold, leaned forward. "We've waited a long time for this, Claire. You've done everything right up to now. This deal will make the company leaner, faster, and more competitive globally. It's what your father would have wanted." Her eyes snapped up, steady and unwavering. "Don't tell me what my father would have wanted," Bryce smirked. "Then perhaps you can enlighten us. What do you want?" The question, though asked with mock patience, struck her in the chest. She glanced at the folder in front of her, then slowly closed it. "I want to keep the company whole," she said. A beat of silence, then murmurs around the table. Someone coughed. Bryce's smile faded. "Excuse me. I want to reinvest in legacy craftsmanship," Claire continued, voice firm now. "Small-scale builds, engine innovation, community partnerships, training programs." Another executive scoffed. "With all due respect, Claire, this isn't a charity. That garage fantasy might make for a sweet story, but the automotive world runs on tech and speed." Claire stood. "Holloway Motors was built on soul, not spreadsheets. My father created a legacy of integrity and innovation. He didn't cut corners. He didn't mass-produce mediocrity." Bryce's face hardened. "You don't have the votes to stop the merger." "No," Claire admitted, "but I have 35% and enough public influence to make your press release read like an obituary." The room went still. "I'm not selling," she said, "and if you try to push me out, I'll take what I've got and rebuild the brand from the ground up, with the people who still believe in what this company was meant to be." She walked out, heels clicking like a metronome of resolve, leaving silence in her wake. The wind was picking up by the time Claire reached the garage that evening. The sky had turned a dusky violet, clouds sweeping low over the mountains like whispers. She opened the side door without knocking. Jack looked up from beneath the Continental, a grease-stained rag over one shoulder. "You look like you just walked away from a firing squad," he said. "Close enough," Claire muttered, letting the doctor swing shut behind her. Jack handed her a bottled water and leaned against the workbench. "Bad day?" "Necessary day." She took a sip, then looked at him. "I said no." Jack raised his brows. "To the merger," she nodded. "They were furious. One of them threatened legal action. Another reminded me I don't hold majority shares, but I didn't care." Jack studied her. "And how do you feel now?" Claire exhaled, long and slow. like I took off a coat I've been wearing for 10 years, without realizing how heavy it was. He smiled just a little. That's what truth feels like. She looked around the garage, the warmth of the tools, the hum of classic rock playing low on the radio, the gleam of the Holloway engine. Under the shop lights, everything about this place feels right, she said, like it's exactly where I'm supposed to be. Jack didn't reply at first. He just wiped his hands and approached the car, opening the hood. Then maybe it's time to stop fighting the wrong battles and start building something that's ours. Claire tilted her head. Ours? He looked at her. You've got vision. I've got hands. Together, we could turn this place into something more than a garage, a school, a community hub, maybe even a small production workshop for custom classics. Not mass-market junk, just real machines built by people who care. Claire's heart. A court! It sounded impossible, reckless and completely, utterly right. I'd need time, she said. Capital, a team. Jack nodded. You'll figure that part out. You always do. She stepped closer. The air between them shifted, heavier, now with possibility. You know this would be a risk, right? Walking away from everything, the board, the company, the name. He shrugged. Sometimes you've got to lose your last name to find your first one. Claire blinked, startled by the truth in that. Jack gestured to the engine. We brought her back to life. Maybe now it's our turn. There it was. The idea that had been dancing at the edges of her thoughts, finally spoken aloud. A life built not on legacy, but on choice. Claire took a breath, the kind that fills the lungs and clears the mind. I'm in, she said. Jack didn't smile, not right away. He just nodded, like he'd known it all along. And in the soft hum of twilight, surrounded by oil cans, blueprints and fading daylight, two people, both shaped by history, both stubborn and scarred, finally stepped onto the same path, not to rebuild the past, but to start again. The next morning, Jack was already up before the sun. The mountain air still held a spring chill, but inside the garage, warmth radiated from memory as much as from the old iron stove humming in the corner. The Holloway Continental stood silent, gleaming, as if listening for what would come next. Jack had barely touched his coffee when Claire arrived. She didn't knock anymore. She was dressed simply, jeans, a soft plaid shirt, and boots with scuffs. Her hair was tucked behind her ears, no makeup, no pretense. Just Claire, raw and focused. You're early, Jack said. Claire lifted a dusty, leather-bound book. I didn't sleep. He raised a brow. I found this last night, she said, holding it up. It was in one of the boxes they sent from Dad's old office. I thought it was a ledger. Jack wiped his hands and took it carefully. The cover had cracked over time, the spines softened by use. Inside, the pages were filled with meticulous handwriting, schematics, sketches, and notes in her father's. A hand. He was building something, Claire said. Beyond the engine. He wasn't just restoring the Holloway legacy. He was reimagining it. Jack flipped through the pages, eyebrows knitting together. This is brilliant. He's working on the new hybrid drive system, but analog-based, before anyone even used the term hybrid. Claire nodded. He wrote that he was tired of letting innovation be defined by what sold best. He wanted to prove that craftsmanship and progress weren't mutually exclusive. Jack's eyes scanned the final few pages. One line, scribbled in the margin, stood out. Build slow, build true. Someone will finish what I started. He looked up at her. You think he meant you? Claire's voice was quiet. I think he meant someone who cared more about meaning than margin. Maybe that's you. Maybe it's us. They stood in silence for a moment, as if honoring the man behind the ink. Jack finally closed the book and handed it back. If we're going to do this, we do it right. No cutting corners, no chasing trends, just real machines built for the love of it. Claire smiled, eyes bright. Agreed. Then we need space, he continued. Tools, people, not just gearheads. People with vision, grit, and patience. I've already started a list, Claire said, pulling out a folded paper. There's an engineer I trust from Detroit, retired early, a fabricator in Oregon who only works in aluminum now, and a marketing guy who quit corporate life to teach high school shop. Jack stared at her. Claire shrugged. I've been planning this longer than I realized, he nodded, impressed. And the board? They're distracted, she said, trying to do damage control since I blocked the vote, but I've got enough legal wiggle room to shift some of my shares into a private fund. Jack's brow furrowed. You're walking away from a fortune. I'm walking towards something better, she replied. My father's vision, and maybe mine too. Jack rubbed his chin. There's an old airplane hangar outside of town. Haven't been used in years. Big enough to hold a few lifts and a machine line, Claire grinned. Show me. By noon, they were standing inside the hangar. Dust blanketed everything, but the bones of the place were sound. High ceilings, wide open floor, light streamed in through rusted vents like the beginning of an idea. Jack walked the perimeter slowly, arms folded. Claire followed, her boots echoing on the concrete. This could work, he said. Claire nodded. I can fund the renovation. Quietly. Rebrand. It under a new name, not Holloway Motors. Jack glanced at her. I want it to stand on its own, she explained. Something honest, something new. He considered that. Then, out of nowhere, said, What about True Form Works? Claire paused. The name settled in the air like it had always belonged there. I love it, she said. It's not just about form, it's about integrity. Jack looked up at the rafters, imagining the buzz of welders, the hum of new engines, the murmur of purpose. He nodded once. Then we build it. Claire turned toward him. Together? Jack held her gaze. Always. Back at the garage. That evening, Jack lingered alone after Claire left, the scent of metal and memory wrapping around him like an old coat. He opened his father's binder again, flipping past pages he thought he'd memorized. In the back, pressed between two oil-stained sheets, was a photo he hadn't seen before. It was him, 12 years old, standing next to his father in front of the very same Continental now reborn behind him. His father's hand rested on his shoulder. Jack's face was smeared with grease, eyes full of wonder, written on the back in his father's faded scrawl. He's got it in him. He just needs someone to believe. Jack closed the binder slowly, heart full. He wasn't doing this for profit. He wasn't even doing it for legacy anymore. He was doing it for every kid like him, every machine that deserved a second chance. Every moment when belief made the impossible possible, he looked toward the Continental. I believe, he whispered, and in the stillness, it felt like the whole garage did too. The storm came just after dusk, sweeping in from the mountains with a wind that rattled windows and sent pine needles skittering across the asphalt. Jack stood inside the garage, arms crossed, watching the rain streak down the glass. It drummed on the roof in steady rhythms, like a distant engine rolling through the clouds. Claire hadn't come by all day, not that he expected her to. She'd said she had meetings, legal calls to finalize the Holloway trust transfer, and maybe some goodbyes to say. Still, he missed her presence, the quiet way she listened, the fire behind her calm. He turned back to the Holloway Continental and ran his hand along the hood. Every part of it had been touched, rebuilt, revived. It was no longer a museum piece. It was alive. A machine made new not by wealth, but by care. It felt like a symbol now, more than a car, a promise. The bell above the side door jingled. He turned. Claire stood in the doorway, soaked from the rain. Her hair clung to her cheeks, jacket darkened with water, eyes impossibly clear, and on her left hand, nothing. Jack's gaze flicked down involuntarily. The absence of the ring she always wore, subtle but unmistakable, was like a silence too loud to ignore. Claire stepped in, slowly. She looked tired, but not worn down. She looked like someone who had fought a storm and walked out stronger. "I signed the final papers," she said, voice soft but steady. "The fund is separate. The board can't touch it. Holloway Motors is still theirs. But the name, the original patents, and the hand-built engine division, they're mine now." Jack nodded, eyes searching hers. "And the ring?" Claire stepped forward. She pulled the small gold band from her pocket and set it down on the workbench between them. The gesture was quiet, final. "It was my father's idea," she said. "The engagement, not the man." Jack's brow creased. "Arranged, not officially, but let's say it came with a lot of boardroom expectations." She gave a half-smile. "He was kind, ambitious, but he didn't see me. Not really, I was just part of the plan." She looked up at Jack. "You never had a plan." "Nope," he said simply. "I had tools and time and too many engines." Claire laughed softly. "Maybe that's what I needed, not someone to make a plan around me, someone to build something with me." She reached out and traced her finger along the edge of the Continental's hood. "This car brought me back, to my father, to myself. But you made me stay." Jack was quiet. His heart was loud. Claire looked at him then, really looked. Her voice trembled just slightly. "I've spent years trying to become someone I thought the world needed, and I lost myself in the process. But here, with you, I feel real. Again." Jack stepped closer. Rain echoed softly on the tin roof. "You're not lost," he said. "You just needed a place that didn't ask you to prove anything." Claire's eyes shimmered. "And maybe someone who reminded me what love should feel like." Jack's throat tightened. "Claire!" But she shook her head gently and reached for his hand. "You don't have to say anything. I need you to know that this, whatever it is, this is the first thing I've chosen for myself. Not the company, not the legacy. You." He squeezed her hand, rough fingers curling around hers like they belonged there. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley. Inside, everything felt still. They stood that way for a long moment, not kissing, not rushing, just holding the weight of what had finally been spoken aloud. Then Claire whispered, "Do you believe in starting over?" Jack's smile was slow and sure. "I believe in rebuilding things that matter." She leaned against him, head resting on his chest. The garage lights flickered once with the storm, but the warmth between them held steady. Later that night, as the storm passed and the air turned soft and cool, Claire stayed behind, curled in an old chair beside Jack's drafting table. He worked in silence, sketching ideas for the new space, Trueform Works, while she traced her fingertips over the photograph of him as a boy, standing next to his father and the very car that had brought them together. On the workbench, her ring remained, a quiet symbol of the past she'd finally let go, and in its place, something truer had begun to take shape. Not forged in wealth, but in love. The newly christened Trueform Works was nothing more than scaffolding and sawdust, but it already felt like it had a heartbeat. It was late morning, and the former airplane hangar buzzed with life for the first time in decades. Sunlight filtered through the high windows, catching motes of dust and gleaming off exposed steel. I-beams. A contractor team worked on installing reinforced flooring for the lifts. Another crew framed out what would eventually be a classroom and mentorship center. The future was rising from the bones of the past. Jack stood at the center of it all, clipboard in hand, his flannel shirt dusted with drywall and optimism. He called out instructions, double-checked measurements, and moved with a calm purpose. Every inch of progress felt earned, not handed down. And for once, he wasn't working alone. Claire entered from the north side, carrying a box of branded shop rags with the new logo stitched into the corner. True form works, built with purpose. She wore a denim jacket over a black tee and carried the easy confidence of someone finally walking a path she chose. Jack grinned as she approached. "If I didn't know better, I'd say you were starting to enjoy getting dirty." Claire smirked. "Turns out it's cheaper than therapy and more productive." He leaned over and peeked inside the box. "These came fast. I had the logo files ready weeks ago. Guess part of me knew this was coming." Jack nodded, then motioned her toward a temporary break table near the back wall. They sat amid the organized chaos, sipping black coffee from mismatched mugs. Claire looked around, taking in the skeletal framework of their dream. "You ever think we're crazy for doing this?" "Only every other hour," Jack said. "But then I look at what we're building and think, no one else was ever going to do it this way." She nodded slowly. "It still surprises me how much people want to help. We've had messages from vintage mechanics in 3 states asking, when we'll be open. One woman offered to donate her late husband's entire tool set, said he would have loved what we're doing." Jack's gaze softened. "Because people miss integrity. They miss work that feels like it means something." Claire smiled, then glanced down at her mug. Her voice dropped slightly. "That's what I've been thinking about too. Meaning." He looked at her. "Yeah?" She nodded. "For most of my life, I measured everything by its outcome. Grades, profit, applause. But lately, I've been measuring by the feeling. How something makes me feel when I'm in it, not just what I get out of it." She paused, then met his eyes. "And this, you, make me feel like I'm becoming the kind of woman I used to pretend I already was." Jack was quiet a long moment. The noise of hammering echoed from the far end of the hangar, but inside the small circle between them, there was only warmth. "You've changed," he said simply. Claire shrugged. "Maybe I've just come home." He leaned back in his chair, setting down his mug. "So what now, Holloway? What's the next chapter?" Claire reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded brochure, handing it to him. He opened it slowly, a glossy trifold displaying the Colorado Heritage Auto Festival, a regional event held every summer, filled with restored classics, custom builds, and once-a-year unveilings. At the bottom was a handwritten sticky note. "Would love to see her run again." Monsieur Cortez, festival director Jack, whistled softly. "You're thinking of showing the Holloway?" Claire nodded. "It'd be the first time she's been seen by the public in over 20 years. A statement piece, not about legacy, but about rebirth." Jack chuckled. "You don't think small, do you?" "I've done small," Claire said. "Now I want to do meaningful." He looked at the brochure again, then back at her. "You sure you want to be the one behind the wheel?" Claire hesitated. "Actually, no." Jack raised a brow. She smiled shyly. "I want you to drive her." The request caught him off guard. He sat back, blinking once. "Me?" She wouldn't be alive without you, and frankly neither would I, not in the way that matters. You believed in something when I didn't know how to anymore." He swallowed, emotions catching unexpectedly. "Claire." She leaned in, voice low but steady. "You've given me something no deal ever did. Not just hope, clarity. And I want to ask you something." Jack nodded slowly. "I'm listening." Claire reached into her other pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. Not a ring box, nothing ceremonial, just something simple and worn. She opened it and held out a silver key. Not just any key. The original ignition key to the Holloway Continental. "I kept this all these years," she said, "even when I locked her away, even when I thought I was done." Jack stared at it. Claire's eyes searched his. "This isn't an engagement or a grand gesture. It's just a key to something new, something we build together, if you want it." His heart thudded slow and heavy. And then, Without a word, he reached out and took the key from her hand. Their fingers brushed, not in drama, but in quiet promise. "I do want it," he said. She exhaled a breath she didn't realize she was holding. "Good," she whispered. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the wide, unfinished space. Wires still dangled from beams. Dust still clouded the corners. Nothing was polished yet, nothing complete. But it was theirs, and it was just beginning. The Holloway Continental gleamed under the Colorado sun like it had never aged a day. It sat at the heart of the festival's main promenade, flanked by velvet ropes and surrounded by onlookers who stood silent, not out of obligation, but reverence. There was something about the car's design, all sweeping curves and unspoken stories, that commanded attention. Jack stood beside it, the vintage ignition key heavy in his pocket, his work shirt pressed and clean for the first time in months. He wasn't used to the spotlight, but today wasn't about him. Not really. It was about her, Claire's father's last engine, Claire's leap of faith, and the small team of believers who made something impossible live again. Claire stood, just a few feet away, dressed in a simple, elegant cream dress and brown leather boots, her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. There was no corporate entourage behind her, no PR handlers. Just her, radiant, calm, real. "I still can't believe she made it here under her own power," she said softly. Jack smirked. "I told you. She just needed someone to listen." They looked at each other for a long moment before turning toward the growing crowd. The Colorado Heritage Auto Festival had always been a celebration of craftsmanship and nostalgia, but this year the buzz was different. Word had gotten around that a lost Holloway prototype, the last Holloway, had been resurrected by a no-name mechanic from a town most of the attendees had never heard of, and Claire Holloway was standing next to him, not as a sponsor, as a partner. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the announcer's voice from the stage, "we invite you now to witness something truly extraordinary, the debut of the only surviving Holloway Series Y, restored to full mechanical life after nearly 2 decades in silence." Polite applause began, then grew louder as Claire stepped forward and took the microphone. "Thank you," she began, her voice clear and poised. "My name is Claire Holloway, and I stand here today, not as a corporate executive or an heir to an automotive brand, but as a daughter, and as someone who once forgot how to believe in legacy." A hush fell over the crowd. "My father built this car in the final year of his life, not for profit, not for prestige. He built it with his hands, his heart, and a belief that the soul of engineering lay not in speed, but in sincerity. After he passed, the world moved on, but I couldn't. And years later I brought this car to a man who reminded me that some things and some people are worth restoring." She looked at Jack then, and every eye followed. "He didn't just rebuild the engine. He reminded me that purpose isn't found in legacy alone, but in what we choose to carry forward." A few people clapped, others wiped their eyes. Claire stepped back and nodded at Jack. "It's time." He moved toward the driver's side, the key firm in his grip, every step slow, deliberate. Sliding behind the wheel, he placed his hand on the ignition like a pianist brushing ivory before the first note. Silence fell. He turned the key. The engine fired, not with a roar, but with a smooth, deep rumble that vibrated through the ground. It was unmistakable, a sound that was both mechanical and human, metal and memory. The crowd erupted. Jack eased the Continental forward down the short parade lane, shifting gears so cleanly it was as if the car anticipated each move. As he looped around the center and returned, cheers rose higher. Photographers snapped shots, children pointed, and older enthusiasts watched with misted eyes. He parked it again in front of the stage and stepped out, his eyes immediately finding Claire's. In the crowd, she walked to him, her smile quiet but full of light. "That was her moment," she said, Jack replied. "And yours?" She shook her head. "Ours," They stood for a few more minutes, greeting festival goers who came forward with questions, admiration, and even job inquiries for the upcoming Trueform Works launch. Jack answered them patiently, and Claire handled the rest, sharing the new vision, giving out prototype pamphlets, and inviting a handful of young mechanics to tour the shop in the coming months. As the sun dipped low and the crowd began to disperse, Claire and Jack finally stepped back behind the ropes, the Continental now at rest. "You know," she said, brushing her fingers along the doorframe, "there was a time I thought this car was just about him, about my father, but I think he built it for more than that." Jack nodded. "He built it for the person you'd become." She turned to him, "and the man who'd meet her where she was." There was no more applause now, no cameras clicking. Just the hum of cicadas and the warm light of a setting sun. Claire stepped closer. "I was thinking, when Trueform opens next month, maybe we should call that first engine model something special." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Got a name in? A mind?" She smiled. "The Grayson." He blinked. "You serious? You taught me how to rebuild what matters. That deserves more than thanks." He paused, his voice quiet. "Then I get to name the second model." Claire tilted her head. "Oh, what would you call it?" He leaned in, brushing her hair back gently. "The Claire." She laughed, a rich, full laugh that filled the air like music, and somewhere behind them the Holloway Continental sat beneath the fading sun, not as a monument to a past, but as a bridge between what had been and what was finally beginning. Autumn had begun to settle over the Colorado foothills, laying down a hush of gold across the land. The trees behind Trueform Works had turned flame-bright, ochre, crimson, deep copper, as if the whole mountainside had caught fire in quiet celebration. The hangar had been transformed. The sawdust was gone, the scaffolding replaced with clean lines, glass panels, and open work bays bathed in soft light. Yet somehow, it still felt like a garage, and that was exactly the point. On the first morning of the official opening, Jack stood alone in the main shop, the air tinged with the scent of machine oil and fresh lumber. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows and fell across the polished body of the Holloway Continental, now parked near the entrance like a silent guardian. It had been 3 months since the festival, 3 months since Claire had handed him that key and said, "This is yours too," but to Jack it still didn't feel like ownership. It felt like stewardship, of something bigger than both of them. He walked the length of the floor, slowly. One bay held a rebuilt 71 Bronco a local high schooler had restored under his guidance. Another housed a custom frame being built from the ground up by a team of veterans-turned-craftsmen, part of a partnership Claire had arranged. And near the back, a wide glass wall separated the garage from the classroom Claire had designed. Part workshop, part library, part sanctuary. She called it the Heart Room. Jack called it miraculous. He heard the footsteps before he saw her. Claire appeared beside him carrying 2 mugs. "Coffee, extra strong. It's opening day after all." Jack took one with a grateful nod. "Place looks good." She gave him a sideways look. "It looks like home." He smiled. She wasn't wrong. Claire wore jeans and a faded Trueform t-shirt, her hair tied back, sleeves rolled. There was no trace of the boardroom executive she used to be, and yet she'd never stood taller. There was peace in her posture now, a kind of strength that had nothing to prove. They stepped outside into the crisp morning air. A crowd had begun to gather at the gate. Families, students, hobbyists, old men in worn leather jackets who had driven from counties away just to see the place where they still care. Claire took a breath and turned to Jack. "Are you ready for this?" He chuckled. "I was born ready. I just didn't know it until you walked through my door with that car." She looked at him, eyes warm. "You never asked me why I really brought it to you, out of all the restoration experts I could have chosen." Jack tilted his head. "I figured it was fate." "It was," she said, stepping closer. "But not the kind you stumble into. The kind that comes back around when you finally become the person you were always meant to be." He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Claire reached into her pocket and pulled out a small plaque, engraved with the words, "In honor of William Holloway, build slow, build true." She placed it in Jack's hand. "You should hang it in the front lobby." Jack read it quietly, then nodded. "We'll hang it together." The gates opened at exactly 10. Children ran in first, their laughter echoing through the building like music. Behind them came parents, retirees, mechanics, curious townsfolk. No one wore suits. No one acted like they didn't belong. This wasn't a showroom. It was a space that invited you to touch, to learn, to dream again. Jack found himself guiding a teenage girl through the anatomy of an engine block, while Claire chatted with a veteran who wanted to volunteer part-time. And everywhere there was movement, not chaos, creation. Later that afternoon, when the sun dipped low and the last guests trickled out, Jack and Claire stood side by side in the open garage bay. The sky was painted in streaks of lavender and burnt orange. The shop behind them glowed softly, a living thing. Jack turned to her. "We did it." Claire leaned her head gently against his shoulder. "No," she whispered. "We're doing it." He laughed quietly. "You always have." "To be precise," she smiled, "one of us has to be." They fell into an easy silence, the kind only built through long work and honest love. Claire looked up at him. "I never thought I'd find this. Not just the garage. You." Jack met her eyes, his voice roughened with emotion. "I never thought I'd deserve it." She shook her head. "You didn't just deserve it, Jack. You built it, bolt by bolt, word by word." He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulled her close. "Then let's keep building." Claire smiled, and they stood there, two silhouettes framed by the light of a place they brought back to life. Not because it was easy, or lucrative, or part of anyone's plan, but because it mattered. And as the Holloway Continental rested in the background, engine cool but heart warm, it became clear this wasn't just a story about a car. It was a story about choosing again. Choosing love, choosing purpose, choosing to believe when no one else did. And for Jack and Claire, that choice, made not in gold or ceremony but in tools and trust, was the one that had changed everything. And this time, it would last. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment and let us know, because this community is built by people like you. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. We've got many more true-to-life, soul-stirring stories coming your way. Thank you for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and remember, sometimes the quietest stories leave the loudest echoes.